Have a seat, Rich. I'll call you in a minute. He simply can't stand there when I'm introducing him. He has to sit. He's an honored guest, a Quodlibit Professor. I must say it is my privilege to introduce this year's Quodlibit Professor, Dr. Richard Stewart. He needs little introduction. You know him. You know him very well, actually. He's a multi-talented, versatile techie on the faculty. He has acquired the reputation of being the seminary's resident geek in all things technological. Besides being a teacher, a faculty member, teaching courses in church administration, evangelism, stewardship, communications, pastor's theologian, and many more over the last 22 years of his service to the seminary. He has also served as the director of the team program of the seminary. Those of you who don't know what team is theological education for emerging ministries. It's a program of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And he has also served as the director for distance education for the Eastern Cluster of Lutheran seminaries.
Can you hear me?
Most of us know Dr. Stewart foremost as a pastor. As he puts it, that he's a poor, humble priest, parish priest, and he has spent a significant amount of his life as a pastor serving congregations in the island of St. Croix, and also campus ministry in Ohio, and interim pastors in, what place is that? Ohio, yeah. The Buckeye State, representing the Buckeye State, and also interim pastor in Calvary Lutheran Congregation in Philadelphia. He's also a graduate of Wittenberg University in Ohio, and also a graduate of the Hama School of Theology, which no longer exists, of the Wittenberg University, and did his graduate work in the field of mass media and communications at the Temple University in Philadelphia. But most importantly, he earned his Doctor of Ministry degree at the Lutheran Theological Seminary in 2007. He joined the faculty in the year 1989, and as I mentioned to you, he has been a utility person doing all sorts of courses in the area of practice of ministry in the church. But most importantly, as I said earlier, Dr. Stewart is a consummate churchman and has been involved in the ministries of the church in various capacities, formerly serving on the boards and task forces of the LCA and the current ELCA, and also he has served as in the board of directors of the Deaconess Board, and since his ordination in 1971, he has been actively involved in congregational life. His community and ecumenical involvements are extensive. As you know, that he's one of the few faithful members of the faculty who is committed to the progress of our students after graduation, and he tries to attend the ordinations and installations of our graduates as much as he can. Dr. Stewart has extensive contacts in other parts of the world, especially in Africa, South Africa in particular, and he has taught there during his last sabbatical and has led several globalization trips to South Africa. And as you can expect, Dr. Stewart's publications are primarily focused on issues of media and technology in theological education and their use in the church. Most of you know that Dr. Stewart has announced his retirement from the seminary at the end of this calendar year. We hope, however, he will continue to assist the seminary in the future in an adjunct capacity. So we're honoring him today for his distinguished service to the seminary for the past 22 years. And we are making him work on this day, November 1st, because it also happens to be his birthday. So we welcome Dr. Richard Stewart as we sing Happy Birthday to You. Please rise and sing the hymn. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
It'll never be the same.
Happy birthday, my dear one.
It's an honor to have 15 minutes of my time stolen. I've got to speak fast to get all of it in. You folks gave me 70-some plus questions? Goodness grief. And I've always said there is no such thing as a bad question. So I feel at least honor-bound to at least mention every one of them. So let me get started. Oh yeah, by the way, I am not a president. I just wear his shirts. Philosophy. In the battle between good and evil, good always wins. Does evil have more fun? Yes. Living on St. Croix for 5 years, we always would reflect on the license plate which said, St. Croix, America's paradise. And then we would add, but Satan got there first. Are people inherently good or inherently evil? Yes. We really can have it both ways. What makes heretics heretics? Attendance at the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Philadelphia. What was the score this weekend? I never heard. Snow won. Let's hear it from Mother Nature. Theology. The doctrine of justification, Caledonianism, antinomianism, how do they affect administration of the parish? We are all participants in an institution. Some of us may exercise our reluctance to be an institutionalized facilitator, but whether student or professor, we are a part of the institution. Institutions, that is, function well when there is little or no dissension. Yet each of these three issues that you raise reflect dissension within the ranks of the institution. I'm certain you know the Caledonian Creed. So let me, follow along with me as from your memory, of course. We then, following the Holy Fathers, all with one consent, teach people to confess one and the same Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, the same perfect in Godhead and also perfect in manhood. Truly God and truly man, of a reasonable and soul and body, consubstantial with the Father according to the Godhead, and consubstantial with us according to the manhood. In all things like unto us, without sin. Begotten before all ages of the Father, according to the Godhead, and in these latter days for us and for our salvation, born of the Virgin Mary, Mother of God, according to manhood. One and the same Christ, Son, Lord, only begotten, to be acknowledged in two natures, inconfusedly, unchangeably, indivisibly, inseparably, the distinction of natures being by no means taken away from the union, but rather the property of each nature being preserved and concurring in one person, one subsistence, not parted, divided into two persons, but one and the same Son, and only begotten God, the Word, the Lord Jesus Christ. As the prophets from the beginning concerning him and the Lord Jesus Christ have taught us, the creed of the Holy Fathers has handed down to us. Now, antinomianism. When it was employed by Martin Luther to designate the teachings of Johannes Agricola and his sectaries, they were pushing a mistaken and perverted interpretation of the Reformers' doctrine of justification by faith to a far-reaching and but logical conclusion. They asserted that, as good works do not promote salvation, so neither do evil works hinder it. And as all Christians are necessarily sanctified by their very vocation and profession, so as justified Christians they are incapable of losing their spiritual holiness, justification, and final salvation by any act of disobedience to, or even by any direct violation of the law of God. You might want to call them to do the do-nothing party of Lutheran tradition. We as a seminary of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and we have chosen to focus our teaching and your education on public theology. We are called upon by our faith to be actors in the life that surrounds us. Thus, those under our administrative care should find it difficult to exercise antinomian principles in the active, vibrant parish, which is invested in the neighborhood and community which surrounds the congregation we are called to serve. Justification. Jeez. You guys know how to throw a practical theologian really stupid stuff that you're supposed to all know. From the joint declaration of the Doctrine of Justification by the Lutheran World Federation and the Catholic Church, October 31st, 1999, to which I witnessed the signatures. Number one, the doctrine of justification was of central importance of the Lutheran Reformation of the 16th century. We've gone way beyond that one. It was held to be the first and chief article, and at the same time the ruler and judge over all Christian doctrines. The doctrine of justification was particularly asserted and defended in the Reformation, shape and special valuation over against the Roman Catholic Church, and theology of that time, which in turn asserted and defended a doctrine of justification of a different character. From the Reformation perspective, justification was the crux of all the disputes. Doctrinal condemnations were put forward both in the Lutheran Confession and by the Roman Catholic Church's Council of Trent. These condemnations are still valid today and thus have a church-dividing effect. Number four, in their discussion of the doctrine of justification, all of the dialogue reports as well as the responses show a high degree of agreement in their approaches and conclusions. The time has therefore come to take stock and summarize the results of the dialogues on justification so that our churches may be informed about the overall results of this dialogue with the necessary accuracy and brevity, and thereby enabled to making binding decisions. Number five, the present joint declaration has this intention, namely to show that on the basis of their dialogue, the subscribing Lutheran churches and the Roman Catholic Church are now able to articulate a common understanding of our justification by God's grace through faith in Christ. It does not cover all that either church teaches about justification. It does encompass a consensus of basic truths on the doctrine of justification and shows that the remaining differences in its explication are no longer the occasion for doctrinal condemnations. So if you're going to administer your parish, look around you, talk to your Roman Catholic priest, talk to the other folks who may be antinomian, talk to the members of your congregation who may reflect any one of these three. Teach them what it means to be a child of God. Is there any difference between Jesus' gospel of the kingdom and Paul's gospel of salvation through Jesus' death and resurrection? Boy, you load up on a guy. Difference? I can never remember ever using the term Paul's gospel. A seminary professor with whom I maintained a 40-plus relationship was Martin Luther Steyerwalt. He died March 24, 2010, just shy of his 97th birthday. You'll hear more about him a bit later. He focused his New Testament scholarship on New Testament letter writing. So I became pretty focused on the letter writing of Paul, practice the art of teaching and forming those gathered in the distant Christian communities to, 1, say that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures. 2, he was buried and raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. 3, he now reigns from the right hand of God and will reign until all his enemies have been destroyed. 4, then comes the resurrection when he will return to the earth and raise the souls who sleep. Those who are in Christ will be raised with the imperishable bodies, and all will be judged. 5, then comes the end. He will deliver the kingdom of God to the Father after destroying every rule, authority, and power. When Saul of Tarsus, this devout Jew was like a defensive player on an American rugby football team. We call it football. Everybody else calls it something else. He was just holding the line. As Paul the Apostle, the one who, without direct contact with Jesus of Nazareth, he was the reimagining the lines of demarcation between the community gathered at Jerusalem and the potential fields of outreach to the Gentile community. As a poor, humble parish priest, the letters he wrote carried the power of a pastor trying to do the best he could in public theology to a scattered community trying to find their own personal meaning in the phrase, Christ died for you. New Testament idolatry. Oh, jeez. What does that mean and what do we do about it? Well, other than passing this one on to Dr. Madison or Dr. Heen, I'd say we need to preach the damn gospel. But do not forget the Judeo part of our Christian heritage. Perhaps Dr. Robinson and Dr. Gaffney may have some other poignant reflections on this question. What is the church's proper response to Occupy the Wall Street movement? Pitch and live in the tents. Isn't that what public theology is all about? When and where does God play? My wife loved this question. Anytime, anywhere. Then his favorite and God's favorite game is hide and seek. Or as my wife said, Deus abscondius. Where did you dig that one up from? It's interesting that most of the central Hebrew stories are in the desert. Can you think of a better place to play than in the desert dunes? And God doesn't always play fairly. Well, God is God. There's this burning bush. Dew in the morning, manna in the morning, quail at supper time. What is your image of God? Oh, geez. You really want to ask that question? Come on. Yeah, da. Faces of God. From the Lutheran Theological Institute. This is Lobsang. Lobsang was one of my students in South Africa, and he was having some difficulty with a patient at the hospital where we were doing pastoral care. He went and saw this guy and tried to talk to him for half an hour, and the guy said, just leave me alone, don't ever come back here again, don't look at me, I don't want to talk to you anymore, and I don't want to see anybody else that's religious. So Lobsang came back to debrief that in his class and said, I don't think I want to be a hospital chaplain anymore. And I said, yeah, right, Lobsang. And James kind of snickered, and so did Tito. And Caleb just kind of went, what? And then there was Lorewa Mushibeki. And she got us all started when she started talking about how one of the students in their dormitory had committed suicide right before finals. And that opened up a whole world around us as we started thinking about who is your neighbor. And I looked at Lopestein and I said, do you really want to be a pastor? And of course, he was a little upset with me asking such a serious question. Yeah, he was right. The hospital stunk, had 6 floors. You can only use the elevators if you were pushing somebody on a gurney. 24 in a ward. But then I had to say to them, look to your left, look to your right. Who do you see? I said, you might want to do the same thing. Because you are the face of Jesus to those you encounter. You are the face of Jesus. You are God personified to everyone you see in that hospital. So may we had the fortitude to go back the next week, and Lopestein sat and talked with him for half an hour. And the guy said, why'd you come back? He said, just because I'm Jesus' face. Then he asked me this really funny one that's going to take me a while. What is your favorite heresy? Well, actually, I included a couple other questions with it. What's the most important question in theology for you at the current time? And as we look at the preparation for theological education, how is it that we end up back in the same place on a segregated Sunday morning? This is going to take a while, folks, so sit back and listen. Hillsborough, North Carolina. I think that the Lord was in there pushing me, and with that kind of support behind me, I didn't have much choice but to keep going. That's a quote from Martin Luther Steyerwalt when he summed up the progressive steps he undertook in 1954 to help lead Lutheran churches in North Carolina and Lennar College, now University, into a new era of race relations. Remember, this is my mentor in New Testament. Steyerwalt, a 96-year-old native Hickory and son of a Lutheran pastor whose family had close ties with Lutheranism for generations, not limited to, but including the affection for the name Martin Luther Steyerwalt. He was a professor of history and biblical studies for multiple decades at Lennar Rhine and other institutions, and in that capacity, he was asked by the Synod President, F.L. Conrad, to chair a new committee on race relations. Previously in North Carolina, there had been a small group of black pastors who formed their own Alpha Synod in 1889. But they received little or no outside support from their struggles for survival and organization. And that is what President Conrad sought to change and asked Steyerwalt to accomplish. Conrad said at the time he had biblical teaching as his reason, but he also had another force pushing the cause. His son David was in Alabama and was prompting his father to act on behalf of the church organization and also to help integrate the student body at Lennar Rhine. His son was pushing him and recommending students for enrollment at the college. Regardless of his own private reasons, President Conrad made public his position that it was time for North Carolina, the United Lutheran Church, to take responsibility for the ministry of all people, including African Americans in the state. His official recommendation was that the Synod extend to reach to include the Negro people within the territory of the Synod. The Synod Convention adopted his recommendation and authorized him to name a committee to propose actions to be voted upon at the 1954 Synod Convention. The Steyerwalt Committee of 10, with only 9 participating, held 5 meetings in the following 12 months. Formulated its recommendations. Most committee members were active in debating their recommendations, but Steyerwalt and Siegel, the only woman on the committee, were the 2 most outspoken. Steyerwalt's committee agreed on a specific set of recommendations that generally included more openness for racial minorities within Lutheran churches, but the group's most explosive proposal was aimed at Lennar Rhine College. Among the specific recommendations for the college was one that proposed opening the campus classrooms to African American students. To say that was controversial would be a major understatement. College trustees rebelled, somewhat quietly but forcefully. They privately demanded that the committee report be rescinded, arguing that to admit black students, even to allow the report to be made public, would be the ruination of campus fundraising, among other things. Agitated trustees argued a familiar refrain for those times, and that the college community was not just ready for such actions. Starwalt said word of the committee's recommendations were leaked to the trustees before they were ready and before he had a chance to explain the committee's reasoning. The damage was done. President Conrad heard of the call of the college trustees and for whatever reason sided with the objectors. Starwalt was asked to either withdraw or water down the recommendations. Reluctantly, the committee drafted a new and weaker version of the work. The revised committee report was presented to the Synod Convention May 5th, 1954, 2 weeks before the U.S. Supreme Court handed down its historic Brown versus Board of Education integration ruling. Starwalt left Lennar Rhine and stated that not long after his committee work was done, it was not a part of my reason for leaving. My work at Lennar Rhine was done by that time. He moved back to Hamel School of Theology, located on the campus of Wittenberg University, where he taught before returning to his native North Carolina, serving for a time as interim pastor for a small, predominantly black congregation in Greensboro, North Carolina. As a college student, I was a newspaper photographer who went down with our football team to play Lennar Rhine from Wittenberg. And standing on the sideline shooting my pictures, I got called every name in the book that I had never wanted to hear ever called anyone. And it was a student photographer who came up beside me and said, "Not all of us feel that way." That was in 1964. I did not ever go back to North Carolina to that college campus until I went back for the memorial service for Luther Starwalt's wife. We still live in a world where Christian community finds that the gospel is more easily celebrated in homogeneous communities. As a member of the Evangelical Lutheran Church, I affirm that the plan to have the membership of the ELCA reflect the diversity of its country and its membership, and I have lived for nearly 25 years hoping and praying that my colleagues in the ELCA would see the gospel importance of achieving this goal. I continue to pray that we may achieve a Pauline approach to our passion for mission and discipleship that does see the world as our field and every person as a child of our creation. That may not fit the broad definitions of heresy, but for me, it's pretty close. Does Jesus have a sense of humor? Of course. Look at whom Jesus chose as disciples. Even more important, look around this room. The Holy Spirit still continues the comedy routine. What is sin, and how does Jesus free us from that? If we were free from sin, we would not be identified with the reformer who instructed us to sin boldly. In many ways, Jesus still dies for our indiscretions, which for me and many find their locus in our inherent ability to not dehumanize another person. There is a continual gift of being a child of God. Borneman's question. This morning, the Moravian watchword for All Saints' Day. Salvation belongs to our God, who is seated at the throne, and to the Lamb. Revelation 7, verse 10. Born on All Saints' Day in 1944, baptized on Palm Sunday 1945, I've never known consciously a moment when I wasn't saved. From conception to today, my family has placed me in the hands of God. Salvation is never an action initiated by me or by you. Is there a place of delight in the Christian walk? Well, the first stop might be across the quad in the library. Walk up to the second floor, there's a labyrinth there. One of our graduates was encouraging a member to come to LTSP for her Lutheran year. She also suggested that the second stop on her walk to faith should be McMinimans for dinner. It can be exercised in lots of different ways. Technology. Do you think that the ELCA will catch up with the web technologies a year before they are useless? Probably. I mean, actually, they don't do so bad. That's not a bad piece of electronic architecture that the ELCA already does. Last year, the Youth and Campus Ministry and the ELCA communicators met in Chicago to address the specific issue. Since that time, a significant number of staff who organized the event we were encouraged to text during the presentations. Facebook postings were flowing, and the wonderful world of the Web 2 was highlighted as an achievable part of our church's ministry. But those same staff persons who organized that, for the most part, had been released. Technology seems to be an area where those who control purse strings do not see the immediate return on the investment involved. This is happening just when technology can offer options which may make our internal communications and electronic delivery of educational material quite different than the last century. What do you think it will take for newer technologies like iPads to be seamlessly integrated into worship? That they are as ubiquitous and unremarkable as papyrus and stylus in their current incarnation as pen and pencil? Well, I can't quite imagine, writing my sermon with a pen and pencil while I'm in the pulpit. Someone's got to do it beforehand. Yet, I've seen them used effectively. I know that Pastor Andrina Ingram, just down the street, uses her iPad as an electronic paper for her sermons. It may not be my method of choice, but that doesn't mean it does not work for you. To tweet or not to tweet? Not me, not yet. Dr. Wiseman may be moving at warp speed in that direction. But like any technological development, some people take the express, some people take the local, and some people are just at the station trying to see if they might want to go. How would you grade today's church in how and effectively it uses technology for ministry, and what troubles you about technology, how technology is or is not employed in the church? If one plans a vacation church school or a stewardship program, why do we not plan our approaches to technology? Like every well-run program of the church, including our beloved sermons, we have to plan, research, adjust to plan, advertise, execute, adjust and execute, and ultimately evaluate the effectiveness of what we are doing. How many ELCA congregations do have an active and actually useful website? Actually, this is a question I did ask research and evaluation of the ELCA. They haven't gotten back to me yet. How virtual is communion? And if you engaged in virtual communion, what would be your avatar? I truly wish I had written a script for Captain Picard. When he went to the replicator and said, Earl Grey, please. This one would be Eucharist for one. Tokay, if you don't mind. Oh yeah, and that is my avatar. What are the three biggest print mistakes you see people making when they create electronic communications for congregations? Well, one is they keep the old and they add the new. If they just add the new, they're making a major mistake, because there are some folks who are in love with the old. We need to function on 3 or 4 generational levels or more in using technology. because we're not all the same. In fact, the next question kind of gets at that one too. And we need to actively seek feedback. There is no way we can live this life in a congregational setting if we don't actively pursue feedback. I mean, standing at the door, hearing the phrase, "Good sermon, pastor," ain't feedback. It may stroke your chest, your back, and your ears, but it's not feedback. Because you ought to check with them on Tuesday and see what they remember. As someone who loves technology, why do you have a dinosaur for a telephone? My Palm Trio does worldwide communications. Paul talked with Dr. Leonard this summer on this phone from Philadelphia to South Africa, and we called him back. It has every piece of my information of my address book in it. I don't carry a calendar anymore. If I wanted to, I could even get my email on this baby. And it has Bluetooth attached to it. I just don't feel like walking around with something in my ear looking like a cyborg. The other is I'm cheap. It still works. In the process of building Brosman, what would you have liked to accomplish but didn't get done? I wish that we had worked hard on the endowment of the staff and equipment. When the original distance learning classroom in the basement of Wiedemann was funded, the gift was divided between the equipment and the maintenance of the equipment. Service contracts and repairs were not worries from a budgetary standpoint. We never set an equipment list for this building until the last 3 months. We set categories of what we wanted to expend for a piece of equipment, because if we had set the equipment when the building was designed 2 years in advance, that piece of equipment would have been out of date. The reality was, on the day this building opened, it was state-of-the-art. On the next day, it was a day behind. It's the nature of technology. For as long as my phone rings, I'll answer it. When it stops, I'll get a new one. But if we had been able to find a little bit more funding, and one of the realities was, the irony is, the initial budgetary amount for the technology in this building wasn't included. It got skipped somehow. And so what we thought was $1.5 million to build the technology into the building ended up being reduced. And finally, we brought it in under budget. About $850,000. And 5-6 years ago, it was state of the art. What is a good student, faculty, staff, administrative response to the seminary's recent financial troubles? We have seen good people released from employment. We have taken salary cuts. Not all courses that you may have wanted have been offered. We have been responsibly and reasonably cordial in the process, but it still hurts to lose friends and lose ground in the progress we have achieved. Yet the unintended consequences of financial belt-tightening still changes what we may have grown to accustomed to being and receiving and are now missing. Change happens. We still need to make the best use of the opportunities afforded us, and when we can, be generous in our support of the institution. Yeah, I've been here since 1989. How would I church the development? Oh, how has it changed for good, bad, and the ugly? Change happens. Professors Lee and Wortliff died of cancer. Professor Moeller was killed in a traffic accident in Thailand. Lori Simon was a faculty secretary and presidential administrative assistant. She died while riding her bike while training for a ride to the shore. Retirements have changed us, as have new calls to serve the church. Classes come, classes graduate, new church leaders are seen in meetings and at assemblies. It's really nice to see some of our graduates standing at microphones at church-wide assemblies. LTSP in many ways has led the educational ministry of the church in its diversity and ecumenicity. That's all to the good. There has been risk-taking in the Uppsala Wagner program. There's been risk-taking in the UTI. We have an identity with the urban Northeast. There is no charting of how the winds of change affect us and move us, yet the recognition that they are constantly present is necessary. How should all these things that bishops tell us that we need to learn in stewardship and administration be addressed in the future curriculum? I was surprised. None of those courses existed when I arrived. They're the ones I've taught. Jack White said to me, well, what do you want to teach? I went, what do you need to have taught? And he said, oh, no. You develop the course that you want to teach, then you teach the course. Well, I was fortunate that I was also the field ed director for a number of years. I started asking pastors what they needed. And that's where that came from. This is a challenge of a new curriculum, though, too. How do we address the issues of education for the theologian in residence program in congregational leadership? That's who you are. As a theologian in residence in congregational life, you are the leader of the formation of the faithful who are called to be the public theologians. You don't see all the public, but your membership does. So how do you fuel them for their outreach throughout the week? The work of the church is not just the work of the pastor or the rostered leader. It is truly the work of all those who find themselves claimed as children of God. Those gathered in this institution are called to be teacher, counselor, leader, trainer, co-worker, manager, identifier of others who can help with the process. If someone in high school knew they were called to the ministry, what would you encourage them to study in college? Anything you want. But at the same time, I know that people who have come here with religion and Bible backgrounds have been frustrated. They feel like they're replicating what they've already got in their hip pocket. So yeah, we benefit by those who are business majors, engineers, pre-med students who change their minds, historians who suddenly find a history of the church just as interesting as history of America. And besides, as we look at the whole issue of the potential of bivocationality, what does that mean for having another tool in your toolkit on how to live life? What's the future of bilingualism and multilingualism in theological education? I have no clue. Yeah, let's go backwards. There are some languages that I've played with in the course of my ministry. The only one I'm really fluent in is English. But I can, do some passable Spanish, and because I can do some passable Spanish, I can do a bit of Portuguese. And when you're in South Africa a while, you're going to at least hear some Zulu and Kosha, and maybe some Swahili. I've got some friends from Liberia who kind of taught me a few words in Pele. And besides, every one of those boats that came over and landed at Ellis Island, they got met by pastors who could speak Norwegian and Danish and German and Swedish. When have we not been bilingual? You attended a seminary that was famous for its innovative education. What challenged us to do as we face to remake the theological education, and what would you propose we learn from our experience? Well, I guess the easiest thing is to show you the experience. We run a quarter system at Wittenberg and at Hamel School of Theology, and so we had 4 quarters. And you started your actually you started your education in the summer. The seminary actually found jobs for people so that they were garbage collectors, replacement caseworkers, juvenile detention center counselors and guards, just about anything that needed summer vacation replacements. And then we would meet once a week to theologize on the experience that our members in our congregations were already experiencing in their professions. 3 courses a quarter. And so over the 16 quarters, you got a choice between 9 academics and 6 field education quarters, and then there was 1 flexible quarter that you could go either way, either more academics or more field ed. We had convocations, and unlike today, they were required. And in that requirement, all the professors had a requirement too. If the convocation theme had a theme, well, they all had themes, your courses had to fit the themes. So if there was a gender convocation for 10 weeks, then every one of the courses had to somehow relate to the gender topic as it was being presented in the convocation series. Or if it was on racism, where does that reflect itself in the biblical languages, the historical languages, etc.? It was a kind of an innovative piece. We did an awful lot of seminar education, not necessarily straight lecture material in which we imparted our knowledge unto you. Matter of fact, most of the times if there was a presentation, it was a student presenting to their classmates. And we had the responsibility of telling folks, that really stunk up the room today, dude. And sometimes you couldn't schedule all your classes right. So when you got around to the end, you had to do 3 divisional exams, which meant writing about a 75-page paper and then having an oral defense with faculty to defend your work. I never took an American church history course. I went into Fred Wentz and asked him what I needed to read, and he handed me his father's book. I went in for the divisional exam and handed the book back to him. But you see, in that educational environment, he trusted me to the point that I had read the book and I knew the material. He asked 1 question, I answered the question, he said, thanks. And then when I went to start doing my African American Lutheran history, I went to him and said, Fred, you know I'm not a historian. He said, yeah, that's right. But here are some clues for you. Yeah, it was innovative. And John and I will do some more talking about some of the other things that happened in that process. And we were able to get, I was surprised when I added it all up, that we were able to get 91 units out of that. It scared me because I didn't think we were doing that well. And now as we look at ATS requirements, it gets kind of interesting as we try and figure out the trim. But there was the requirement that your languages be done prior to coming. That would add an extra burden for some folks. Theological education. Even in the midst of your busy schedule, at ordination you attend installations of alumni and other people with whom you teach. Why shouldn't I? If you build a picnic table, wouldn't you want to sit at it, share food and conversation, and know that it serves others? At ordination installation, we are no longer prof and student. We are colleagues. In our last South African adventure, I told my 8 students they were going to be our host when I came back with students from here. And during our time in South Africa, we worked with 2. We met 2 others. We talked to 2 on the telephone, and 2 were in the northern province we could not get a hold of. So they were our colleagues with the students that I took over, and they are now my colleagues. They still call me prof. Not much has changed. Joy, celebration of a completed task and a new adventure engaged is why I'm at ordinations and installations. We're co-workers in this field. What biblical text is more urgently needed by the church today and which needs to be taken off the shelf and used, and which is most egregiously used in the church at the present time. I don't know about egregious, but this one makes sense for me because it comes from the Book of Common Prayer. It's part of the confession. Hear what our Lord Jesus Christ saith, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Of these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. If seniors can only get one thing out of pastor as theologian, what would you want it to be? You are not in this alone. That enough? Since kids' sports participation on Sunday mornings is rising, what does this mean for Sunday programming, Shabbat, and ecclesiology? Well, it ain't just the kids. It means the church has become a choice rather than a habit. The challenge is one of the formation of those who gather to determine their willingness, depth of commitment to the counterculture. I've always believed that the church is countercultural. We are just beginning to see the complexity of that decision. Can we love those who choose not to fight the culture? Can we be open to them when they do find time for Christian community? And can we be creative in our own disciplines to live and demonstrate the value of our faith and what it has for our lives as a living witness to others? During Blue Laws, you couldn't do anything. Now Sunday morning is the busiest time of the supermarket. Should we be moving to supermarkets to find more people? That might be an act of public theology. One might say that that is reflected in the gospel of Sunday, gospel for Sunday, but there are some provisos in that gospel that we read this past Sunday. The Pharisees who sit at Moses' seat, they tie up heavy burdens hard to bear, and they lay them on the shoulders of others, but they themselves are unwilling to do and to lift a finger to move them. They do all their deeds to be seen by others. They make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. They love to have a place of honor at banquets and the best seats in the synagogues, and to be greeted with respect at the marketplaces and to have people call them rabbi. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher and you are all students. And call no one your father on earth, for you have one Father, the one in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. And the greatest among you will be my servant, and you who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. It's a tough life we live. But yeah, we ought to be in that supermarket. An architecture question. Our buildings ought to be accessible, flexible, and affordable. Many of our urban students from independent congregations have no difficulty finding space to do and have worship. They are willing to grow and change locations as congregations tend not to be neighborhood churches, but regional gathering points. The bigger you get, the more you need to invest in the geography surrounding you. Hosanna Church was not afraid to change when they sold their building and moved into a theater. How many synagogues start in homes and then move as they grow? It's not just a Christian thing, inviting someone to a location that is accessible. It's an important part of today's congregational life. Many of our older buildings have built into them barriers, even for those who have lived in their church for ages. Yes, buildings can be welcoming, inviting, vibrant, and technologically sound and ecologically sensitive. I know you're here someplace and I can't see you. It takes time and commitment from the leadership of a congregation to take all these into consideration as a congregation seeks to invest heavily in their neighborhood. It is still being done as witnessed by Living Waters Lutheran Church in Flemington, New Jersey. They built their building designed for the ecology around them, which meant that they used sun power to heat and power their building electrically. And their baptismal fount pulls from the water, the flowing waters, living waters that flows through a window at the back of the sanctuary. The solar panels that are on this side of the building, which are aimed at the sun, can also be added to with a solar field behind the church if they need more power. What is the biggest pitfall facing the church today? Willingness to risk and the ability to hunker down. We tend to do the latter rather than the former. We want to preserve what we have rather than to risk it all for the sake of Christ. Now that's an interesting thing for a guy saying as he's retiring and going out the door, because it also says something about what is that I'm willing to risk as well. What is evangelism? And as a teacher and pastor of the denomination that has evangelical in its name, what is your top three pieces of advice as you pursue this? Find others with stories of God's grace. Seek out those who are unafraid of being extroverts for Jesus. And apply growth in faith not just to numbers, but to the depth of the faith in the people you have with you. Because as you apply that depth of faith and teach them formation in their own Christian journey, those who have the stories of grace will pop out and tell their story. And you might find those extroverts for Jesus along the way. Finances. As a consultant, start with Genesis. The offering of generous giving by Abraham in the 14th chapter of Genesis and Jacob in the 28th chapter of Genesis, their pledges were made as a part of their request for God's blessing on their separate quest, their pilgrimages to recover Lot or Jacob's reconciliation into his family. On these two promises of generous offerings, if there was success, are based all of the Deuteronomic code upon which is based tithing. This is considered a generous offering in its day. But in today's economy, we treat our offerings to church with less regard than we do the gratuity left for a waiter or a waitress in a restaurant. Which and what is considered generosity in our day? Given my love for technology and stewardship, how do you feel about direct deposit? Yes. Congregations in South Africa had it posted on their bulletin boards. It was an item of safety. Large amounts of monies were not kept in the churches. And so they asked people to use their direct deposit accounts and their electronic transfers to transfer their money to the church. If you need a public demonstration, even simply giving will give you a sheet of paper you can drop in the offering plate. If you don't need the public sign, it is first fruits giving. And the frequency of you can set the amount and the frequency of the offerings, and it's always going to be there. It's always going to be supporting the church, and you know what the mission and ministry is that it's supporting. When seminarians visit other congregations and encounter the offering, what is the proper response to give money as a tithe when they know that they have given to you for your studies and needs to be paid back? That's a tough one. But each seminarian has to wrestle with their own sense of generosity. One hopes that seminarians are living on some earned income rather than just loans. If a gift is given, what is your ability to share that gift? Remember, there was a widow who only had a little flour and a little oil, enough to eat one more meal before she died. And yet she shared it. Why are Lutherans so uncomfortable with money? We don't know what to do with the offering and worship. Is this a cultural or a denominational issue? There was something transparent about my grandfather, trustee in the AME church, going to the back room after the walk-up offering and counting the money and then reappearing. If there wasn't enough money to pay the pastor or buy the load of coal for the week, transparency in that setting made the offering one of how we do and how we continue ministry and mission that we started. While passing the plate was a bit uncomfortable, people knew where their investments were going. I'm continually surprised by congregational councils who keep the finances close to their collective chest, rather than sharing the responsibility with the entire congregation. All of us make up the body of Christ. And when the body is stressed, it means it helps to let the other members of the body know what's going on. I mean, if you hurt your leg, your brain knows. That's figuratively and metaphorically the state of the body of the church, too. If you were to write the next chapter of the story of an international cooperation in theological question, who would be the characters? Would the ELCA and LTSP show up? I'm not certain about LTSP, but probably. We've been there before. We'll be there again. I mean, what's the Jeopardy question? What's the largest Protestant denomination in the world? Lutherans. It would seem unusual for us not to show up, as we, which includes the ELC, have been in the forefront of international cooperation. We have been diminished in our own exposure to international education by the Lutheran World Federation's desire to have south-to-south, Southern Hemisphere education. We have not had students come to us from the Southern Hemisphere as often as we used to. But our sister seminary in South Africa does have a graduate program, a PhD program, and one of their graduates is now serving on the staff of the Lutheran World Federation. He is from Zimbabwe, and he was a student while I was there in 2008. We have such a tradition with being missionaries to places like Africa. What can we learn that we might have forgotten? Accompaniment is a relationship. We need to move from mission to mission among. Accompaniment describes the way God walks with us and the way our church therefore walks and works with Christian communities throughout other countries. Together we participate in God's reconciling mission. With a significant number of immigrants and refugees now in this country, we really are seeing an African descent strategy in this country. And it may not be perfect, but for many, we are welcoming old Lutherans to a new place. Sounds like Muhlenberg all over again. What does it mean to be Lutheran in a post-denominational age? We have tended to have our growth rate be our birth rate. I did 50 baptisms in St. Croix per year. But then there are times when we offer opportunities, like the lead soprano was a lifelong Unitarian. She liked the music program. Lutheran Social Services on the island was well known. The 4 congregations at the time I was there saw their ministry as one for the whole island. In the U.S., it's leaning toward a consumer marketplace, and the challenge is both a public theology and a countercultural presence in the process of faith formation. I think it means that every new congregational leader needs to be sensitive to their own location and context, and it will not be the same from place to place, in spite of our own hymnal. Jesus got angry when he saw cheating in the temple. So when does the ELCA get angry? Anger needs direction. The question doesn't offer direction for anger. Misplaced anger can be just as dangerous as being helpful. I could be angry towards those I know who have left the ELCA, but I have lived with the fact that they have chosen to disagree and not to be in dialogue. This is unfortunate, but anger won't help. If you are speaking about our economic condition, again, I'm not certain where to direct my anger. I, for one, did not invest in Bernie Madoff. Now, that may not be well-placed anger. If anything, I vented my frustration earlier about something else, for which continues to anger me. The ELCA has just completed a 5-year initiative, Book of Faith. What are the challenges for biblical literacy? I'll refer this question to Dr. Heen. He just got back from meetings in Chicago. Biblical literacy has always been an issue. Muhlenberg came to the U.S. to regularize the organization of the church and to challenge what some saw as irregular theology. Even my own ministerial lifetime, we have had the Search series in the ALC and Word and Witness in the LCA. We've always been studying the Bible. church and educational ministry of the church has suffered by intermittent attendance. For one, I do not remember not missing church. Insights from South Africa. Most of them are not positive. I mean, there are gifts that they can give us. There are theologians who are maybe in the forefront of the liberation movement. And most have taken a back seat, though, as their countries have developed into political reform. And when I look at the worship life, I still see the cultural imperialism of North America and Europe ever more present. It's a double-edged sword. How can 7 congregations in the Virgin Islands and 26 Puerto Rican congregations have an influence on the church, especially when you're 1,500 miles away from the mainland of the United States? Yeah, we started in 1666, but that's hardly an influence. And we only became really a part of the North American church in 1917, when the United States bought the Virgin Islands from Denmark. And so at the Constituting Convention of the United Lutheran Church in 1917, the delegation from the Virgin Islands showed up. Pastors retire? Yeah, I guess. At least we slow down. Don't worry, I've got a lot to clean out my office by June, July, August, September, October. One of my friends retired for the 3rd time, is now a chaplain on a cruise ship. What's your favorite thing, occupation within retirement? I keep telling folks I want to be an usher at Citizens Bank Park for at least 1 year. I know what I'll be doing. I'll have to be there early and I'll have to stay late for 81 games a year. When you really, really retire, what will you miss about this place? Shaping the future of the church. I pray that I won't be a grumpy observer, and I've seen a few of those. In the next 5 years, will we likely have a resource on African American Lutheranism? God, I hope so. I've asked Dr. Kruger to find a space for me that I don't have to pay for my research on African American Lutheran history. It needs to be put in order before it's put in the archives. But I think there's also a way in which we can somehow share those resources among those who are doing the research electronically, because it needs to be seen not just by me, but everyone else in availability. What's on my bucket list? I don't have one, but my wife does have a bunch of round to-its. Spiritual discipline. I try to find some time for God each day. Sometimes a little, sometimes a lot. My days in campus ministry, I had a half an hour drive both to and from work. That was God time. What's your t-shirt look like? In the pulpit, I preach the gospel, damned or not. On the pitch, as a referee for 10 years of my life, I was the law. Topic which bristles you, regularly looks at your direction and assumes you are a new Lutheran. Many do not know my own history. My graying hair has eased that tension, as there is an assumption that I may have some wisdom now that I'm a senior citizen. But yeah, it used to grate a lot, even if I wore a collar. In the old days, fully round. What book has been most influential in your life? Have you seen my office? You want me to pick one? There is one on my desk, though, that is an original copy of one of the first black studies in black books that was printed in 1947 that my parents bought. I still hang on to that one. You're the first person who knew about Salina, Ohio. What brought you to Philadelphia? Luther League. I came initially to Frankfurt Avenue Settlement House as a summer worker, and I've been back every year since 1963, either for a Luther League Executive Board meeting at 2900 Queen Lane, or the board of the Division for Professional Leadership, or the board of the Deaconess Community, or the Advisory Committee for the Lutheran, and then finally employment at LTSP. What's your favorite religious joke? I don't joke. But then there is my t-shirt. At least I don't joke about religion. I don't remember jokes. It just doesn't happen. I make them up a lot, but I don't remember them. If you had one question to ask at a G20 meeting about Christian identity, I want to know when they're going to add another African nation other than South Africa. There's an awful lot of oil and other industrial products in in the African continent. What is your what if question? What if the world all agreed that all humans are created equal? That would be fun. What are your favorite games, recreational activities? My wife says I don't play games. I walk with new knees. I bike and I swim. And I love going to sports events. My parents offered me wisdom and whimsy as the gifts they imparted. Upon departure from college, my mother said to me this piece of advice: remember, Richard, no matter where you go, what you will do, you will always add color to the group. She was right. How has illness changed your life and affected you and changed your theology and how you see God? With cancer, you know you're not in charge. And most of us like to be in charge of our lives. Why is it that no one can simply walk into Mordor? I don't do Tolkien. Ask Dr. Swain. She's from New Zealand. When the seminary... cricket? Are you kidding me? It'll take place when the seminary takes seriously the old colonial custom of tea time in the afternoon. American lifestyle does not know how to play a game that takes more than 4 hours. We're always in a hurry. American football question. Different football fan. Where is your heart? Is it on the pitch or in the church? And can it be both? Football is American rugby. I'm sorry. There is only one Fédération de Football Internationale. And I was a referee, FIFA, for 10 years. You refer to my t-shirt. What do the Buckeyes do to fix their quarterback issue? I don't care. I'm a Wittenberg grad. We have the winningest record of football for any small college in the country. Many years ago, the president of Gettysburg and the president of LTSP donated a Tappert edition of the Book of Concord as a prize for winners of the big event, Luther Bowl. Something more contemporary? Is there a Kindle version? Just asking, just asking. When the offense runs trips to the right or the left, what is the best defense in the end zone? I don't know. Can you field 12 players? What happened to the Red Sox and what happened to the Phillies? Well, one thing did occur to me. During the season, we played all the bats in the league. When you get to the playoffs in the World Series, the bats get better, even if your pitching is fine. Our bats never got better. Long hot summer, ethics students falling asleep. Professor energizes class by posting the most vital religion in the world. Is it soccer, which attracts the most followers and fans? Do you agree that football may be your religion? No, I do not agree. It is not my religion, but it has become my passion. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Stewart, for sharing your faith, your beliefs, your convictions, and your wisdom with us. Thank you for your dedicated service to this seminary for the past 22 years. And you have demonstrated once again you're truly a practical theologian, a public theologian, and a faithful minister of the church. We will celebrate or honor Dr. Stewart at an appropriate time about his retirement, sometime during the end of the year or early next year. But before we adjourn, the faculty will meet in the next room for a luncheon. And I want to take this moment to acknowledge the presence of Don Stewart, the person behind Dr. Stewart. So thank you so much for accompanying Richard all through his ministry. She's a practical theologian in her own right, and she's a Christian educator most of her life as a teacher serving many congregations. So thank you, Richard, once again, and we stand adjourned. Thank you.